Mhm.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 4, Coming of Age.
Mhm.
This episode explores Marcia Duvall's preteen and teenage years that began in DC and ended in Philadelphia in the 1960s and the early 1970s. During this episode, Marcia Duvall shares her experiences as a young Black woman coming of age in the midst of great change in her family and society. How you doing, Marcia?
I'm doing all righty on this absolutely gorgeous spring day. Yeah,
All right, that's what we like to hear.
yeah.
So we're just going to jump into the conversation and keep this party going.
Mm.
In a recent article that I read from Psychology Today, and it's actually from 2022, that's entitled The Magic of Black Girls. Dr. Oni Rogers, a Black associate professor of psychology and human development, and the director of the Development of Identities in Cultural Environments lab at Northwestern University, and her colleague, Dr. Sharetta Butler Barnes, another Black woman, associate professor of social work at Washington University in St. Louis, wrote, Black girls know what society thinks about them, but they also know what they think about themselves, their own identities and possibilities, and their potential and power, their humanity. Such knowledge is a necessity for Black girls to construct who they want to be in society, where they are often othered or deemed as invisible. Whoa, that's like a lot to unpack. Whew,
Quite a bit.
quite a bit. I'm super happy that I was able to find that juicy quote by these two sisters, because for me, when I think about the stories that you told me about your preteen and teenage years, a lot happened. A lot happened to help shape who you are today. And so, looking back at your preteen and teenage years, how did you see yourself? And this is like a three-parter. Was it through your own lens, or did you see yourself through the lens of your family or society, and or all?
You're right. 3 parts, huh? Before you finished, I was ready and willing to say, through the lens of my family and society, but there was a minuscule piece in the process of unfolding that leads me to believe that I had some I had some images of myself as well. Um, as I think I shared in an earlier episode, it was very challenging during that time to have consistent constructs of positive Black female role models. I mean, they were sort of few and far between. We had role models, but they were Black men for the most part. So creating, imagining being yourself was more uh, a mirror, a reflection of the Black women that you did have in your life. So I think it's probably not a stilted answer. It's a combination. Now, to the extent what percentage is this and what percentage is that, not sure about that, but it was probably a combo. Yeah,
I like that, the combo.
yeah,
It's I like to call it like the gumbo effect, or a
yeah.
melange, as the French say, a mixture of things that create who we are. Tell us about who you were at that time, where you went to school, what you like to eat, wear, and do during your preteen and teenage years in DC.
Well, there weren't a lot of teenage years. Yeah, I guess there was a few in DC. I think I also shared that I was a fat or overweight child. So, self-image is a big deal. And at that age, um, your associates and your children are not particularly kind. So that came up a lot. And I also was quite developed for my age. I think I, again, shared that I started my menses at 12. Um, McDonald's was a big deal because, you could get that hamburger and them fries and that shake for, at that time, I believe it was under $1, you know. My mom was such a great cook that I didn't really have to go, out of my house to be fed good tasting food, so a lot of it was about her cooking. Um, I was as an only child, um, I understand that I really had a lot of privileges that lots of other children didn't have. And my parents were hopelessly middle class. And so, we often went out to dinner to places that, of course, where the cats meow then, but don't exist now. And I developed a taste for lobster uh, very early on because I was exposed to it. I spent a significant amount of time with myself. I like to read. I enjoyed music. And like I shared again earlier, there weren't a lot of peers in my life, not on a regular basis. Again, the weight affected what I wore. Um, I was never particularly trendy in the sense that I didn't have to go out and buy a pair of Nikes. I didn't need Nikes to think that I was cool. I wore what I wore, and oftentimes I was just grateful that it fit.
I want to go just a little bit deeper so that folks start to see the DC that you saw during those years. Do you remember any of the places where your parents took you to eat or where you first discovered lobster?
Oh man, I was trying. It's so funny. I was trying to think of the name of this restaurant that was on Wisconsin. I can see it. I drive past the location, but for the life of me, I cannot. Wait a minute. The Three Embers. It was by all standards, 5, 6 stars, white tablecloth. You entered from Wisconsin Avenue. I almost want to say that it was that they had torches outside that lit it, and for real, you didn't see a lot of peppers of color in there. Um, I mean, we didn't go every week or any of that, but maybe once every couple of months. Uh, and then at the time, the non existent waterfront that is not what it was then, Flagship and Holgates was where Black people, all people, but Black people went there, and there was a sense of feeling welcome. I do remember the rum buns, because I was always curious, like, how come you guys are letting me have rum buns? This is liquor, but now I understand the rum is cooked off. But yeah, those are the three that come to mind. Thank you for asking because I was
Yeah.
jarring my mind trying to remember that first one.
Yeah, because I was wondering where would you go for lobster at that time?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, Hogates. Thank you for reminding me about Hogates. I've got some stories about Hogates as a young 19, 20, 21-year-old hanging out there when they turned it into a dance floor after a certain
Mm.
point in time. Um, the music that you listen to,
Mm.
I'm wondering, like, what was that? Did you
Well,
go to
it
the
was the
record store?
Motown era, baby.
Yeah, well, tell us about some
Motown
of the
era.
people.
So, like I said, we had a hi-fi and we had a plethora, just an incredible collection of 33s and 45s. I remember the first uh, 45 that I bought myself was Dionne Warwick. Um, but it was nothing for James Brown and Gladys Knight and the Pips and the Miracles and the Supremes and Ray Charles and Nancy Wilson, and all that was always an album away. So music was very much a part of really how I soothed myself because there were at that age prior to my mother's exit, there were internal rumblings that I didn't quite understand, disquiet that I didn't quite understand. And music, I would go down into the basement and by myself, with myself, and stay for hours just listening to music. Yeah,
The music was a healing balm.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Do you have any ideas of like the places that you would go to purchase your records in DC?
Sam Goodies.
Sam Goodies, okay.
Sam Goodies was the record store again that people of color, black people primarily went to. I mean, there may have been a few other places here and there, but it was Sam Goodies. Yeah,
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, okay. There's nothing like hearing someone's first experience with choosing and buying their favorite music.
Mm.
It's one thing to grow up and listen to your parents and grandparents and family and friends or siblings, but there's another thing about going into a record store with your money,
Yeah.
making your purchase, and you bringing it home and guarding it so it doesn't fall apart.
That therein lies some of the distinction, I think, between the life and lifestyle and opportunities and experiences of an only child versus someone with siblings. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? I didn't have to guard it. It
Okay.
went in there with everything else, and both my parents were pretty. They regarded music with something that you took care of.
Mm-hmm.
There was a dust cloth dedicated,
Mm.
and before you put the album on there, you held it up, and looked at it to make sure that it was clean and and that the needle wasn't going to scratch it.
Wow. I love it. Music and the rituals around
Mm.
taking care of the music and listening to it and having it as a healing balm. Powerful, powerful. So we're talking about music, we're talking about what what Marcia was like as a preteen and a teenager. And we may have touched on this already, but I want to bring it back. What were some of the most important experiences and aha moments for you in DC as a preteen, as a teenager?
Well, I think I'm sure I know for a fact that we did touch on, my first sexual escapade. And, I think that for obvious reasons is something that you even if you want to, don't ever forget. It's a memorable moment. And the death, the assassination of John Kennedy was a
Mhm.
very, very, very big deal. Um, it's interesting because as I was thinking about my response and sharing that, I thought, well, what about Martin? Was that? But for some reason, it was very different. For some reason, that's not quite accurate. I mean, in hindsight, I understand now how much I bought into empowering this man with saving the race. Somehow he was going to be the thread that took us from where we were to where we were trying to get to. And I think that the slap in the face was a reminder. I shared that on my blog. It was like one big wail. It was like just one big wailing. And it was, a very real but painful reminder that we hadn't come the distance that we wanted to tell ourselves that we had. And the other biggie was, being there during the riots and being literally affected because of, that they were stationed outside of your house and all that, and being close enough to the actual experience of the rioting to witness the burning. You could see it, you could smell it. So yeah, pretty you know I don't think at the time that we necessarily understood or even cared to understand or or thought we needed to understand the impact of those kind of traumas.
Mhm.
I mean, and it's only as I look back at how I did and didn't respond to them that I get that they were very traumatic events.
Mhm. Yeah. I want to go back to just day-to-day life and thinking in terms of first experiences with having a level of independence and moving around the city. And how did that feel? And what were some of your first experiences?
I didn't venture that far from now I'm living on Kansas Avenue. And I really didn't venture that far from home that often alone. I mean, if I would walk down Kansas, turn up Quincy, go to the corner of Georgia Avenue and Quincy, and that's where at the time you could catch the trolley, and Georgia Avenue turned into 7th Street, and I took it all the way down and got off if I was going to go hang out with my mom, have lunch or whatever it was we were doing. Used to be I don't know what to call. I guess it was a diner called the Blue Mirror, and literally, the outside of it had blue, cobalt blue, the whole outside of it. And my mother was big on banana splits, although you better not get it wrong because she would send it back a million times. Um, but she would often, tell me to get on the trolley and come down there. But that's probably the furthest that I ventured. There used to be, actually, it's still there, but it is not what it was. There was a neighborhood Safeway at the corner of Randolph and Georgia Avenue. And when I say neighborhood, for those of you that are familiar with the current DC, the Safeway that exists there now is monumental. The Safeway that was there in the predominantly Black neighborhood at the time was really, you went there because that was the closest um, store of any size, other than a little neighborhood bodega that you could go to. But it wasn't necessarily because you wanted to, because it had a stench that was, you walked in like this. I mean, and I'm not, as some of my friends always suggest, I'm not making up my material. That's that's just the truth, and that was there for a very long time, until the neighborhood began the gentrification process. But other than that, and maybe going to the Tivoli, I would walk to the theater, to the movie theater, on the corner of 14th and I think Monroe, um, by myself, meet friends there, or, meet a couple friends there. But that was pretty much it. Um, Although now wait, during the summers when we were, but I got dropped off, I would take the train to Philadelphia by myself, to visit with my with the family that I eventually ended up living with. And there was my cousin. I call her my cousin because, for all intents and purposes, she is, though not by blood. But I would take the train to Philadelphia prior to moving there, so that had to be in that timeline. But I'm just walking from, I'd get dropped off in the front of the station and walk to the appropriate track.
Yeah. We haven't touched on spirituality in your home, and if there was a presence and if there was a practice or rituals. And so I wanted to, before we move to Philadelphia, the life there, I want to touch on a little bit about that, if there's something to touch on about the spirituality in your home.
Well, I think that word is going to be more prevalent and come up more in regards to me than it is my parents. While certainly my mom was a member of the Goshen um, Methodist Church where she's buried, but there was not a consistency of attendance. Um, certainly like holidays, Easter and all that kind of stuff, um, but not with any sense of regularity. We went, it was, every now and then. My stepfather belonged to another church at 15th and R, and I want to say that it is also Methodist. No regularity until much, 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 much later.
Mm-hmm.
Much, much later. I don't really ever recall actually going to that church during that period ever. He was a member on paper.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that will help the listeners as we move into your adult years have an idea of what your journey has been and where you are headed as we talk about Marcia Duvall in her 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
Stop right there, girl.
I am. I am. I know enough to be able to pause. So your life changed significantly, and you completed the ninth grade and you relocated to Philadelphia. Remind the listeners, and for those that may just decide to listen to this episode, what was the cause of the relocation and any significant moments during that process of relocating?
Well, I was relocated. I didn't raise my hand and say, "Oh, I want to move to Philadelphia and live with Aunt Hazel and Uncle Richard." Um, my mother went to Alderson State Prison in West Virginia for, she was sentenced to 2.5 years. Uh, and Evidently, she was aware that the probability was great that she was going to be found guilty of the charge, extortion. And she had made arrangements with my aunt, um, who was actually my stepfather's cousins. And this is the home that I visited with some regularity in the summertime. I'd go and stay for 2 weeks or so. Um, and I was sent there. I think I touched on this. I'm sure there was some sense of the perception of inappropriateness for a girl my age to remain in the care and custody of my stepfather. I know that, I'm sure that was a big piece. So I was sent off to Philadelphia. Yeah, 10th grade.
All right. So what part of Philadelphia did you end up?
West Philly, 40th and Haverford.
All right.
Which again looks nothing like what it looked then. They were pretty much wood connected, that block in particular, wood connected houses on one side of the street and shotgun, we call them shotgun brick houses on the other side, but you walked, opened the door, and you could look straight through the house, except for the one establishment on the corner, the Morse Funeral Home, black owned and operated, and it took up, a significant amount. It was a corner house, and it was not wood; it was brick, and their living quarters was attached to the funeral parlor. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm assuming this was an all Black neighborhood.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We always have our funeral homes in our neighborhoods. That is one thing you can count on,
yeah,
for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So you move in,
Mm-hmm.
and you are now no longer an only child.
Mm-hmm.
And you're sharing space with someone, you're sharing a room.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that, because that's a significant change.
Well, what had been a pretty amenable relationship uh, became something other than that. I won't say what I'm not gonna. I won't say what I'm gonna say. It wasn't adversarial, but certainly it was more than me being impacted. You're now asking a 15-year-old being, 15, 16, to go from having this person enter the space and be in it for a couple of weeks, and you're busy having fun and stuff, to sharing the space. That's a different dynamic. And certainly I was not used to, on any level, sharing anything. This is that now I understand how much of significance that has in my prior only child experience. And, I think I indicated, I had two rooms. Now, my room was two rooms, and there was a very large closet, and then a smaller one, and there was a cutout opening between the two rooms, and I had, double windows that overlooked the back. This was a very small room in the middle of the house on the second floor. The other side was a bathroom, meager, and my aunt and uncle's room here when you walked up the stairs. And then the room on the end was their then living mother, who was very much up in age. And then you went up another set of stairs, and it was the brother in the family, who was a little bit older, 2 years older than us, I believe. But, you know, I can't say that it was an easy adjustment. And what's also true is, at that time, I'm not feeling grateful. I'm not feeling like this woman had a big enough heart. I didn't understand that, to take in someone else's child at that precarious age. I was busy taking their inventory. I was busy judging, like, they don't have this. And, we did that. And they don't, they water down the orange juice. Who does that? So I mean, I know that a lot of that comes along with being that age, and you're just, one is just so terribly self absorbed. And I know that I can be hard on myself. Um, so it's a hodgepodge of true adjustment, true adjustment. And then I went from, a a school that was, both boys and girls, to an all girls Catholic high school. I didn't have any understand. I didn't, okay, uniforms. You know what I'm saying? Places where they tell you, don't sit on a boy's lap without a phone book. You know what I mean? This was like back in the day of, nuns in serious habits, immaculate heart, serious habits. And they didn't play. They had rules and regulations.
Mm.
And so did my aunt and uncle. My uncle was a Philadelphia policeman, and he was very proud of that. And he got up every morning, and that uniform, was my aunt's job. It was starched and creased, and his shoes were spit polished, and at least appearing to do the right thing was of great importance. Yeah.
Wow. I can see that uniform, and I can see those shoes, and your aunt ironing it and taking the time and the effort. It
Mhm.
was it was a very big deal.
Mhm.
A very big deal. What is the name of the high school?
West Philadelphia Catholic Girls High. As a matter of fact, I'm now connected to it, by social media, and they just had their 70th gathering,
Mm.
70th celebration gathering, because most of the people that attended in my class have or are in the very close future, turning 70. Yeah.
Wow, powerful. Talk about the classes and the people that you met at the school.
Well, now I'm in a show enough integrated environment. Though there was that created the opportunity for there to be segregational experiences. The girls, the Italian girls from South Philly, hung with themselves, and the Irish girls from, Northeast hung with themselves, and the Black girls hung with themselves. Um, the the classes were, of course, mixed, um, and the nuns were, they were very, very dedicated to making sure that you didn't just get passed along, that you actually learned and retained some things. We had regular tests, regular check-ins, all that. And still at that time, as I said about my earlier interest in school and schoolwork, I was still committed. My mercurial effort attitude didn't come until a little bit later, until I arrived at college. But then I was still very serious. And so, that was historically a still very tumultuous period for people of color. I graduated in 72. And when I graduated, I was given the award, the Cardinal Kroll Award for Racial Harmony. Yeah, so I was that Black girl that, why can't we all just get along? Now, this is at the same time that my Black counterparts who were part of the graduation ceremony, we had to wear white gloves, and they cut a hole out in the center so that their Black hands would show through. So when I think back to that time, you know, I forget what I refer to myself as, but you said unique. Okay, um, it was unique at that time for a Black girl to be willing, and I'm going to take this as an act of courage and not an act of cowardice anymore, but to be willing to step up and say, "Well, is there a way for us to have honest, open conversation about these opportunities as opposed to shutting one another out?"
Mm.
So, yeah, I was popular and not
Mhm. I take it as an act of courage,
popular.
given the fact that so much transition happened during that time, both the society, both in your life, both in your growth, your physical growth. I mean, so much was happening. And at the time, I'm not certain if you were aware of the feminist movement, if that was something that.
I was aware of it. I absolutely was aware of uh, Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan and all of that, but I was equally aware of SNCC and my sister,
Angela Davis.
the, I mean, I was, they weren't shut out for me. The sense that there was the willingness for there to be as much physical harm as seemed to me to be a part of uh, a part of the movement was very frightening to me. It was very frightening, and so my tendency was to shy away in the literal sense, although it wasn't because I didn't understand and hadn't had some experiences that would cause me to be shut down to white people. Um, I just was frightened of the violence. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I often wonder how people navigated the day-to-day life of of the times. Maybe that's something that people will wonder about us, later on.
I'm sure.
How was it in terms of growing up in the house? I mean, of living in the house with your aunt and your uncle and your cousin. And did she go to the school too with you?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I was yeah, how was it? Well, I think like anything else, I got used to it. I don't know that acceptance was ever necessarily present, but I got used to it. It was the cards that were dealt, and so I began to have a need to be a part of, as opposed to kind of over here on the side observing, so I perpetrated the fraud of fitting in, and in some in a desire to be fair and balanced here, they were loving and caring people. Their Black experience and their personal experiences, there is no formula, was just different from mine, and so I really was given an opportunity to be exposed to another way of being Black in America that I would not have been. But again, hindsight, because in the experience, more often than not, I'm sure I felt like a victim. You know what I mean? Instead of this being a blessing, instead of it being a gift. But there were, one of the things that we would always do, and yeah, I just thought it was preposterous. I didn't get it. Window shopping. That was like a big deal. That was like an outing. Seriously, we would, get in the car, me and Aunt Hazel and the girls, and there would be a few other friends, you know, that would come, and we would literally just go window shopping because it wasn't about being able to afford to buy it. Well, that wasn't my experience. If we was going shopping, we was going to buy some stuff, you know?
Mhm.
Um, we used to go to the Italian market down in South Philly. I can still see those images. I mean, they were literally still some carriages with horses, that went through the street with fresh vegetables and stuff, and the best cheeses that you could ever imagine. And that, it was fascinating. It was fascinating to me. And those were examples that, those were opportunities where my mind was expanded, because my experiences were. were expanded. We didn't have that stuff in DC, not like that. So, and kibasi, which is a Polish sausage that you could only get. Why I'm remembering these things now. You could only get down there. It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
Thank you for giving us some flavor of your Philadelphia
Yeah, man. Yeah.
back then. What mattered most to you in Philadelphia? What mattered most to you during your time there? What was the most important thing or most important things to you?
My grades, because I still felt like if I could just get good grades, everything would be okay. And that people liked me. Spent a lot of time people pleasing, and not. Oftentimes, it wasn't because I necessarily wanted to do the thing that I was doing, but it seemed to me that if people just liked you, that it increased your value, So it was my grades and people like it. Yeah.
And speaking of people liking you, any friendships that were important to you during that time?
Well, actually, with a teacher, her name is Noreen Banana, and she cared. She would call the house to see how I was doing. As a matter of fact, she was the centrifugal force for my going to college where I went. She was from New England, and she literally did the work to determine what potential scholarships might be available to me. And her family lived in Rhode Island. And literally, we drove. She put me in her car and we stayed at her family's home in Rhode Island. And I visited Brown, uh, Holy Cross, and uh, Radcliffe. Yeah, wow, how about that? And I actually got into Brown, did not get into Radcliffe, um, and got into Holy Cross. But at the time, Holy Cross was in dire need of, they were getting ready to go co-ed, and they were in dire need of pigmented students. And so they came up with the most money because I actually wanted to go to Brown, but couldn't afford it. Yeah, so she was very vested. I think she saw a fragileness and a brokenness in me that I didn't at the time.
Hmm. What about peers? Anybody from the school, anyone from the neighborhood, or anyone?
Cousin name, like I needed her approval. You know what I'm saying? And today we are relatively close. But I sought her approval a lot. There were, my sexuality was beginning to be suspect, question, like what am I? So there were a couple of older. They were older. They were a year in front of me. Students that, I would make an effort to develop relationships with. But for real, again, I spent more time with myself, even in that situation. I would sit in the window and think I was watching the trees grow, rather than go window shopping. You know, I learned how to be in relationship with people. I learned how to be social. It didn't really come all that naturally to me. So not really.
And what about the visits? Did you get to see your mom during this time?
Yeah. Again, few and far between, but I'm sure that we went, 2 or 3 times a year. Um, and my mom was she actually lived in what they called an honor cottage. She wasn't in the general the general prison itself. She wasn't in the general population. So she had her own. It was like a little cottage on the grounds that separated her. But she also understood the importance of. It was sincere with her, though. She cared about people, and so she made it a point to develop relationships with the general population. And I remember a couple times we went down and they had, these little internal campus shows that they would do, like lip syncing the Supremes and all that kind of stuff. And when she walked in with her family, the people sitting up front and stuff would get up and give her the seats. Um, so she was she made the best of it. She made the best. They were difficult visits because, I always wanted to go and wanted to see her, but I never wanted to leave because I didn't know when the next time would be.
Let's take a breath here. So, lessons learned during these years. Any lessons learned that are coming to mind?
Well, this keeps coming up for me, so I guess this is the place where it'll come out. Uh, I have a piece in my bathroom, and for the sake of being in integrity, in the next episode, I'll make sure I identify the source. But it says, if we don't go within, we go without. And you know, certainly I understand that at that age it's difficult to understand how imperative it is that we go in. Um, but I think the lesson for me is that I created much more difficult, painful path in front of me because I was in so much denial and it seemed like I would die if I went in and acknowledged the pain of losing her for that period of time in that way. So, I sidestepped it, but it showed up anyway.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that like life and lessons?
Yeah, pretty much.
They keep coming around until we get them.
There you go.
Yeah. You talked about your teacher as someone that was a key person in your life, but I want to open it up to see if there were other sheroes or mentors or people who inspired you during these years. I know in previous episodes we talked about family members, but if there's anybody from the Philadelphia years besides your teacher, and maybe they were heroes, maybe they were gentlemen.
Well, I'm making an effort to focus on that window of time. So thank you for adding the hero piece. There was I can't remember his name, and he wasn't present for very long, but for the time that he was present, he reinforced uh, that it was possible for us to get along. He was a young, my age. He went to the brother school of West Catholic girls, and I don't really recall how we met, um, but that we met was pivotal. We immediately it was like one of those lightning bolts, and we just immediately connected. There was nothing at all sexual about the connection. It was spiritual, and we would figure out ways to have to go here or go there so that we could meet up and just sit and share dreams and talk about stuff. And he invited me to go see it was the last concert that Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix together at the Palestra. And if I didn't say it, he was Jewish actually, and my aunt was not thrilled, and neither was his family. Uh, but we did it anyway, and he left an indelible mark that in the face of adversity, uh, we can survive. It won't kill us, and we honor ourselves. So yeah, I wish hopefully before this is all said and done, I'll remember his name.
Yeah. Thank you for that. But now I want to hear about the concert, Janis
Oh no,
Joplin and Jimi Hendrix.
come on now. I mean, it is what it is. Come on, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, give me a break. How could it have been anything other than extraordinary and filled with, the smell of reefer? I was a good girl at that point. So, I smelled it and clutched my pearls. Was like, oh my God, what? Yeah, 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 yeah. That didn't last too much longer, but I mean, it was sold out, uh, and who knew that it would be it was already history. And again, mixed metaphor. Come on, Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. That's a visual right there that's just mind blowing, mind blowing. You know, yeah, they gave it all they had, and who knew that in both instances, Jimmy first and then Janice, that they were giving it, you know, not just their best, but their last. So yeah.
Any favorite songs from their
Purple
catalog?
Haze, man. Purple Haze, Purple Haze, Purple Haze. Yeah.
I was thinking that. I was thinking that.
Yeah.
Purple Haze. So as we begin to wrap up this coming of age episode 4, I want to end with a question about if you could write your teenage self, Marcia or Marcia, depending on who's saying it, what would you say to the teenage you in a love letter?
The thing that I say at the end of, it's short and sweet, although I'm it's often suggested that I'm quite wordy and don't get to the point very quickly. Just, be fearless in my efforts to choose to love myself and not think that my mother's choices were a reflection of me, that she was there because of me and I wasn't worth it, and that I needed to, it was okay to look the way that I looked, and talk the way that I talked, and act the way that I acted, and be curious about the things that I was curious about, that was not something that needed to be corrected and changed, to be fearless and love myself. Yeah, that would be it.
Wow. I think that's a perfect way to close this chapter in our walk through your juicy life. Everybody, we thank you for tuning in and listening and sharing this way of being that shows up on Mother Earth is Marcia Duvall. Marcia, do you have any closing words other than what you've already shared with folks?
Well, for the last 3 episodes, it's been be fearless, choose love, and I'm gonna do an add on, because I want, if I leave no other footprint in this experience with others, for you to, for one, to understand how necessary and what an act of love it is to go within, because in the absence of that experience, the withoutness will show up in ways that may not be able to be corrected. So,
Thank you. I received that in such a deep way. It's I concur, I agree. I say hallelujah, Ashe, amen, and aho. And with that, dear listeners, we say thank you. Go within, be fearless, choose love. Until the next time, Marcia and I bid you a fair good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good everything. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great one. We'll see you next time.
ciao.